On a warm night in June, almost 100 years ago, circus performers and workers slept or drowsed in the early morning hours aboard their train. The heat was oppressive, making it hard to sleep. But they had performed that day, they were exhausted, and another performance was due to start in just a few hours, so they slept as best as they could. The train was stopped along the tracks for a much-needed repair, but some of the cars were still on the actual rail line. Rushing towards them was an empty troop train, driven by a man who should have been wide awake, but who'd fallen asleep on the job and was just about to cause the second greatest disaster in U.S. circus history. Today I will inform you about the Great Circus Train Wreck of 1918, the damage that was done, the cause, and the aftermath. First we will look at the wreck itself, what happened, the devastation that it wrought, and how it directly impacted my family. What was the Great Circus Train Wreck of 1918? The Lake County Times described it as one of the most appalling train wrecks ever known, with scenes of indescribable horror that beggar all description. The Hagenbach-Wallace Circus was traveling to their next engagement when one of the trains was struck. They had two trains. One of them was struck by an empty troop train that was returning from delivering soldiers about to go overseas to fight in World War I. The accident was the second greatest circus disaster in United States history. The first was the Hartford Circus Fire, which involved the Big Top catching fire. According to Mark Young in the Guinness Book of World Records 2001 edition. 127 people were injured in the train wreck with varying degrees of trauma. Richard Lytle, in his book The Great Circus Train Wreck of 1918, Tragedy on the Indiana Lake Shore, relates how one woman was trapped in a train car, and when her rescuer tried to pull her out, her hair got caught in a projection, and he pulled really hard and tore her hair right out of her head, but was able to get her free from the train. Another performer broke every one of his ribs, endangering his life and causing him great pain. My great-grandfather, Joe Diericks, a strongman, acrobat, and juggler, was so badly injured that he was in the hospital for months and had to have 4 surgeries. More than 80 people were killed, some immediately, and some in a fire that started after the crash. Exact numbers of the dead are unknown, as the bodies were so badly injured that many of them were torn to pieces. They couldn't really determine how many whole bodies could be made from the bits and pieces that they found. People were crushed by the locomotive and debris, but that wasn't the only damage. A fire started. It was believed to have been caused by kerosene lamps, but to this day, nobody knows how that fire exactly happened. Many of the injured succumbed to the flames, crying out to their loved ones and co-workers, begging to be rescued or put out of their misery. A Lake County Times headline read, "As father fights fire with bare hands, his wife and 2 children perish in wreck. Sights drive men mad." Most of the dead were crew who worked setting up the circus, but some performers died, including trick pony riders, acrobats, and 2/3 of the great Diericks Brothers strongman act. My great-grandfather, Joe Diericks, his brother, Arthur Diericks, and their partner, Max Neatsporn, made up the Diericks Brothers act. Joe and Arthur were grievously wounded and were taken to the hospital, where Arthur succumbed to his injuries. Max passed away at the scene. No animals, however, were lost or killed, as they were in a second train well ahead of the first train and out of danger, according to Richard Lytle. Now that we know what happened, we turn our attention to how it happened. What was the cause of the Great Circus Train Wreck of 1918? According to Richard Lytle, the following was the cause. The driver of the troop train, Alonzo Sargent, was asleep and missed every warning sign. He had been up for hours and had eaten a heavy meal because he was expecting that he was going to be going a long time without getting a chance to eat again, so he ate way too much. He had taken kidney pills, which were rumored to have a narcotic in them. So he's very sleepy, and he fell asleep. Brakeman Tim, who was assigned to the circus train, tried his best to alert the oncoming train, which he could see rushing towards them. He went so far as to take fusees, which are like a flare, and he took one and threw it right into the window, or he tried to, but the glass was rolled up and it just bounced off the glass, and Alonzo Sargent slept on. The Lakeland County Times wrote that the survivors said that the fusees lit up the heavens. Richard Lytle said the railroad men aboard the circus train could only watch in helpless horror as the circus train bore down on as the troop train bore down on the unsuspecting circus train. The troop train cut its way through the final 3 cars on the circus train. The cars were made almost entirely of wood and could not resist the metal locomotive, which sliced its way in like this, crushing and shoving everything out of the way, including hundreds of people that were sleeping or trying to sleep. Now that we know what happened and how, we'll examine the aftermath of the accident. The aftermath of the accident included a trial, numerous lawsuits, and a need to bury the many dead. According to Richard Lytle's book, an inquest was called to investigate the death of Arthur Dierks, but it could have been called for any one of the many dead. The Sun reports that the engineer was arrested and charged with manslaughter. According to the Washington Times, only the engineer was held responsible, saying all other members of the train's crew were exonerated. The jury was hopelessly deadlocked, and a mistrial was declared. $1 million worth of lawsuits were filed on behalf of the dead and injured, leading to the bankruptcy of the circus. Joe Dierks, my great-grandfather, the circus strongman who survived, never recovered enough to resume his former career in the circus and ended his days as a caretaker for the football field at Notre Dame, says Richard Lytle. The dead were buried in a mass grave at a place called Showman's Rest. The site is marked by the statues of elephants, circus elephants. It's owned by the Showman's League, according to their website. It had been recently purchased as a resting place for showmen, in other words, people who performed in the circus or even in vaudeville. It was supposed to be their final resting place. It was purchased shortly before the accident, and they had no idea that it was going to be needed for such a tragic event so quickly. Today I've described one of the greatest disasters in the history of American circuses. Almost 100 years after this tragic event, which occurred in 1918, local children visit the mass grave and have no idea what happened or who's buried beneath them. According to the Chicago Tribune, these children think that elephants that died in a circus train wreck are buried there because of the elephant statues. They're close enough to hear the real elephants at the nearby zoo, and sometimes they scare each other when they hear those elephants trumpeting, thinking they're hearing the ghosts of elephants long dead.